Well, the last two, there was Hyatt Jude.
Hyatt Jude.
Riley Elizabeth.
That's an
yeah.
old one.
She's got a cousin, Elizabeth Riley. Then Amir, I don't know what her name is.
That's the
He's a little black baby. His brother is Kenzo in Houston. Houston,
Yeah, no time they can marry there.
we got Ava and Easton.
That sounds like a
Who else we got here?
Yeah.
Joey and Rand, Mac, Jace, Daisy and Harper, Lincoln, Landon, Brett, and Jason. Not Jason. Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
The bunch of them.
Maybe turn
Yeah. They're a different generation maybe. Used to be, you sort of repeated the names through the family, go back a couple generations, something like that. Not so much anymore, because this Riley Elizabeth, Janet's middle name was Elizabeth. I don't know if that's why they use the name or not. Then got another granddaughter with the same name as Jane.
Wow.
Her other grandmother. Anyways, not many are reusing the family names like they used to.
Yeah, that used to be my middle name is Buell, after my mother's father's first name. My brother's, his middle name is my father's father and his grandfather's first name. So that's the tradition in those days. So you didn't have a first name, you had a middle name.
All right, welcome to First Universalist of New Madison on this nice, happy, friendly, balmy Labor Day. That's our theme is Labor Day, and being as we are a progressive church and progressive members, we're taking the progressive approach to Labor Day. So if you want to wonder where your weekends came from, where your 40-hour week came from, where your 15-minute breaks came from, that's all due to the people who struggled and fought for Labor Day. Any announcements?
Just a reminder that next week we're joining our El Dorado friends are coming up to New Madison, and at the picnic shelter here right across the street.
Turn up by the water tower.
Our service and combined a little breakfast, meal, lunch, whatever as well. The sign-up sheet is great. We expect people signing up for different things, so we should be all set. We'll need to take some chairs over there on next Sunday morning. But aside from that, I think we're all organized. I haven't touched base with Derek Parker, but I know he's been promoting it down in El Dorado. So we should be all set for a big celebration, early fall outing, if you will, pre-fall.
And
Next week.
the church will be open if there's a problem with weather. The shelter's covered, so even if there's a light weather, we won't have any trouble. If it's like blowing and windy, we may have some trouble.
I have a question. Do we bring our own drinks and plates and things?
No, Paula, good question. Paula will bring those for us. So we've got plates, cups, napkins, plastic cutlery from the basement. We're going to use that. And we should be all set. I've got table covers.
And beverages?
Paula is bringing coffee, and I'm bringing lemonade. And bottled water.
We'll probably have some odds and ends of other beverages too. And we're going to have a few basic main things. I'll bring some like buns and cold meat and some like potato
Yeah, I
salads.
signed up too.
Yeah, so we'll have plenty to cover. If anybody wants to bring anything, feel free to bring something if you want to contribute, but it won't be necessary. Derek asked some questions, so I sent him a picture of the park. So he asked about parking, and I said there's parking, and it's a lot closer than El Dorado. And he asked about if the church was open for bathrooms, and I said there's a porta pot down there. So, and I'm sure if we have a giant crowd, we can park on the street in New Madison on Sunday morning. That's not going to be a problem. So we should be good. Is there electricity down there?
Yes.
I'd like to check.
Yes.
There is.
There is.
Say,
Thanks, Kenny.
if we're going to take coffee, I guess we could take it in a cooler or a thermos.
Now, she's all set for that, but she asked also about electricity, and she said she would walk up there and check that.
Okay.
Kenny assures us there is. That's very
If nothing else, we could run an extension cord from Chaz's house. It's only a block, and so
A couple of
Mark,
couple
Mark's a neighbor there.
yes.
Now, there's electricity in there.
Okay. So it should be hopefully a good time to get together with El Dorado. They're not having church today, so I was kind of curious to see, because Derek did announce that if anybody wanted to come to church, they're more than welcome to come here. So I see that our honey didn't attract any flies. So, all right, any other announcements? Let's see, what do I have? Oh, Mike brought in some really neat zinnias from his garden, and seeded and self-seeded. And I cut off a lot of the deadheads. I don't know if you're supposed to do that or not. The sunflowers are looking pretty bedraggled, but the reason I keep bringing them in is because the Ukraine is looking pretty bedraggled. There was a thing on the news about Ukraine had started school, and the kids are meeting in a subway station underground. That's the only place they can meet. And the kids were overjoyed, and the parents that first day of school were overjoyed to actually have school in the company of other kids, because most of the children in the other cities in Ukraine that don't have subways or don't have shelters, they have to meet, like electronically dispersed, like we had to in this country during the epidemic. And that, kids really love to get together and they love to socialize. But think about sending your kids to school in a bomb shelter. I mean, and this just goes on and on and on. I'm not sure. I don't know what to say. Okay, I think we covered everything. So our prelude is 337. There's a lot of words with it if you want to follow through, because it's in the hymnal, and it's words I have not known yet.
I just discovered it myself when I was looking through the hymnal, and I'm going to play it through twice, so you can bond it. And then turn the page, and there's a more difficult arrangement on the other page. So I will be playing 3 pages. So it's page 337, if you like to watch the words.
That looks like an inkwell spill. And the lyrics are pretty interesting. Have I not known the sky and sea, put on a look as hushed and stilled as if some ancient prophecy drew close upon to be fulfilled? Like mist, the houses shrink and swell, like blood, the highways throb and beat. The sapless stones beneath my feet turn foliate with a miracle. It's almost like Revelations. All right, our cello sliding. These are opening words for a Labor Day by Megan Visser. We enter this meeting house for kindness and comfort. May rough, worn hands and aching backs be healed. We enter this meeting house of hope for equality. May those who labor to survive live to know justice. We enter this meeting house of love and vocation. May our bonds of solidarity be strengthened. We enter this meeting house of courage and friendship. May we proceed hand in hand toward freedom. Our opening hymn is right next to our prelude, 338. I seek the spirit of a child. Children are real beyond all lies. May I see faith's a gift to our eyes. Okay, our affirmation is once again Labor Day related, and you can see from our beginning picture, we're going to go through a little quick history of Labor Day and then kind of a little bit, kind of be amazed and kind of astounded actually by when you went to school, you know, even in high school, they talk about economics, and they talk about economics on TV and commentators all the time. You have people that have doctorates in economics and people write books about economics. But as I begin to watch some of these things fold and unfold and then refold, there is something to the study of the science of economics. So we're going to look at that a little bit too. Brick by Brick Musings from a Questioning Soul by Meg Barnhouse. All summer, workers have been building a brick wall along the road by my neighborhood. Against the brutal heat, which could have been this summer, they stretch a tarp overhead to get a little shade. I watch them take bricks in their dusty brown hands, one by one, butter them thickly with mortar, line them up, and then tap them down row by row. One man who looks to be in his 70s is the leader. His skin is the color of bittersweet chocolate. His beard is gray. Slender and tall, he moves from one group of bricklayers to the next, reaching and bending, looking like a heron in the marsh. When he pauses, he stands very straight. I see him teach the others how to do the work. He stoops over to look at a line of bricks, hands on his thighs, inspecting the work. Sometimes as I drive by, I see him put his hand on the back of the person he's teaching. Often they both are smiling. He looks like he loves what he's doing. I wonder how he can love building walls day after day, handling bricks, teaching the art of laying bricks. Is it the teaching he loves? Seeing how his students learn, what their styles are? Does he know about when it will be done? Does he look forward to seeing it finished? Or does he love the process, the feel of the bricks in his hands, the squish of the mortar, the challenge of making the symmetry of pillars and arches, the geometry of it? I think from the look on his face that he loves the process. I imagine that he never thinks about the end of the project, the completion of the wall. I think he will go on to the next wall as if it were just a continuation of this one, then the next one, and the next, and never be bored. I want to be like that, and I am, I guess. In my job as a minister, the bricks are stories. I hear stories of family and work, stories of loss and reconciliation, stories of rejection and disaster, illness and healing, birthing and dying. I tell stories every Sunday and in between, teaching, challenging, confessing, inviting people to learn and laugh and think. Brick by brick, story by story, we build a church, seeing the patterns, the symmetry, the plain joy of setting one story on the other, sustained by the strong and the beautiful structures they make. We will never be finished. It's okay. A good Labor Day story and a good Labor Day analogy for what we do in the church with what people do with their hands. Okay, joys and concerns.
I haven't spoken with Lou or Denise this past week, but I hope they're faring well. Perhaps we can call them after service today.
Actually, yeah, are they home?
I don't know. You know, they were both ill last week when we chatted.
Yeah, you sent a card, didn't you?
No, they didn't.
We're running out of cards, so if anybody sees, I've been looking online for a collection. I hate to go buy one card at a time, because sometimes you can buy like a box of sympathy cards. So if anybody sees that, let us know, and the church will pay for that.
What happened? Why is there
They got COVID again,
Oh,
Lou and Denise.
wow.
So, and speaking of COVID, I guess we'll put that up as a concern. The rates are increasing, the rates of death are increasing, the rates of hospitalization are increasing, and the rates of infection are increasing. So I am going back to wearing my mask at Rural King and Kroger and Walmart, any place where there's a bunch of people who probably are not vaccinated who cough all over each other. That would be a place. And I've seen other people wearing their masks too, so I think this is something you need to be aware of. the COVID infection is not dead and it's mutating. The next virus or the next vaccine comes out in either this month or next month, and for my family, everybody will go ahead and get vaccinated for the next one. So, and then get your regular flu vaccine too. Ukraine, we still have our sunflowers. The Ukrainians are actually on the offensive. They're trying to break through the Russian lines. If you've seen any pictures of that, minefields all over the place. Something they call dragon's teeth, which are concrete. They look like tripods made out of concrete. Evidently, they stop tanks from going through. But the Ukrainians are slowly making progress. And the Ukrainians are inventive, as they seem to have been, sending drones into the actual state, the country of Russia, and attacking Russian munition plants, Russian airfields. The one difference between the Ukrainians and the Russians, the Ukrainians attack military targets and very seldom are there any injuries in their attacks. The Russians attack apartment buildings, hospitals, blood transfusion centers. Their aim is to cause as many, they attack like a Saturday morning gathering market area in the center of a town where people are there buying their vegetables. They send a missile in intentionally to kill as many civilians as possible. It is inhumane. A joy, I'm a chick magnet, and I did not name that horse, and I don't know who did, but I'm a chick magnet, won at Scioto Valley, or Scioto Downs, I think it was the 14th race last night, which was pretty impressive. I did not have that much faith, so I didn't even put a bet on him, which was my mistake. So maybe I'll do better the next time. And talked to Margie, that's the majority owner. She is willing to bring Curly back and put him into training for a month to see how his leg does. So at least we'll have a resolution. If he trains and his leg is all right, he'll go back to racing and hopefully do well. If his leg falters again, we'll get him castrated and I'll have a pet at my house on a permanent basis. But if he's castrated, I can put him in my own. I've got a sleigh and a buckboard and a saddle, but I was told not to interfere with his racehorse training, so he's just been kind of hanging out there doing nothing. So we'll see how that works.
I got 2 joys and a giant concern. Number 17, number 18, great grandbabies were born.
17 and 18, wow.
17 and 18. I attended the funeral of my great nephew this past Friday, who passed away as a result of his suffering from the Middle East service. He served 8 years in the U.S. Air Force and passed away.
And was in the Middle East and then was affected by the, that's too bad. And war.
He spent quite a bit of time in rehab, medication and stuff.
And that goes on and on and on. At least the military and the Pentagon have at least allowed in the last iteration the people who were around those burn pits. They could never define where all the cancers and everything were coming from, so they were always denied VA benefits. They finally have changed that, and they are allowing VA benefits for those people, so hopefully they will be. And this is Labor Day, and it's kind of like Military Service Day. You want to appreciate the services that people have given us and the sacrifices they've made for our lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you would like, again, also, you were on the subject of COVID and are most fortunate of having vaccines developed for COVID and us living in a bit more peace than we were before. I read a delightful book last week concerning the founders, basically, or the early pioneers in the whole research technology of messenger RNA, which was used to produce in a novel way the vaccine.
Yes.
And that, of course, is using your own body's defenses against simply a virus, a protein in the virus, and not the virus, to stimulate our immune system to be aware of it and fight it. The 2 individuals who founded that, of Turkish descent but actually grew up in Germany, was Ashlam Teresi and her husband, and his name was Shalom. And interesting enough, they're brilliant. It illustrates the fact that they were actually using messenger RNA to actually develop cancer, immune-based cancer therapies for people. And they were able to quickly produce that virus using that same technology in less than a year's time, the vaccine, I should say. And that is amazing. Amazing in terms of pioneering immunology, but more importantly, these two individuals not only founded basically the technology, but they also founded the company. They're billionaires today, as I speak, from their being business people as well as, I would say, probably in the future, Nobel's prize-winning immunologists. So I'd candle for those two individuals.
Yep. The value of science. And as you were pronouncing their name, it reminds me of a story I heard years ago, and you probably heard it too, during Bill Clinton's reign, Bill Clinton's presidency. Remember, he sent a special military flight to Bosnia during the Bosnia War, loaded with vowels, because there's a complete shortage of vowels in Bosnia with the pronunciation.
Yes.
And they had reports of people being so grateful that they could finally pronounce their son's or their daughter's name, because literally it became an A-E-I-O or U. So I don't know why that came to mind, but it gets
A new means of diplomacy.
Yes, vowel diplomacy.
Phonology as diplomacy.
Yes, and we are more than happy to share what we have with Bosnians. So, and the Croatians and all the Eastern European people.
And Turkish as well.
And Turkish as well, because I can't pronounce any of them. Even if you told me how to pronounce them, I can't. All right. What do you notice about this picture from the pyramids? This is an actual picture taken off the pyramids. And this is the topic of our study. Even in ancient Egypt, thousands and thousands of years ago, children worked. And we have a history of children working, and if you grew up on a farm or our age limit, and that's been from the beginning of history, children worked on the farm because farms were family and children helped with the family. So that was expected, and people were expected to work as children. What happened with the Industrial Revolution kind of changed all that, and that's what we'll go through. So here's our children's story.
The Industrial Revolution first began in Britain and later spread to the rest of Europe and eventually North America. It occurred approximately between 1750 and 1850. In general, it involved the rise of the factory system in manufacturing. Child labor was a common feature of industrial societies in the 18th and 19th centuries. For example, children as young as 5 years old worked in the industrial factories and mines.
These were kids working in the coal mines.
Children were employed in industrial workplaces for several reasons, including 1. They were viewed as obedient workers. 2. There was no affordable schooling. 3. Working class families needed the extra income. 4. There were few or no laws protecting children. 5. They were considered to be more agile for industrial workplaces. And 6. The children were paid much less than an adult worker.
Children were paid in the 1840s 1/10 of what an adult
The
made.
working conditions faced by children during the Industrial Revolution were brutal. For instance, the children were forced to work long shifts in hot, dirty, and dangerous settings. Injuries were common because the children were often not provided with the proper clothing, gear, or training. As well, dangerous machinery was sometimes left unguarded.
See the belts spinning there with no guards?
A British House of Commons report from 1832 noted, There are factories, no means few in number, nor confined to the smaller mills, in which serious accidents are continually occurring, and in which, notwithstanding, dangerous parts of the machinery are allowed to remain unfenced. Injured children were generally fired from their job without any form of assistance or compensation. In 1819, a doctor from Manchester, England, famously stated, accidents were very often admitted to the infirmary through the children's hands and arms having been caught in the machinery. In many instances, the muscles and the skin is stripped down to the bone, and in some instances, a finger or two might be lost. Last summer, I visited Lever Street School. The number of children who had received injuries from the machinery amounted to very nearly one half.
One half of the kids in that school were injured in factory work.
Children also regularly faced harsh treatment in the industrial workplaces. For example, they were often denied breaks and were sometimes subject to beatings and whippings by factory managers. The horrors of child labor in the Industrial Revolution eventually led to a movement that sought to end it altogether. Robert Owen was an industrialist and utopian socialist. He operated textile mills in New Lanark, Scotland in the early 19th century. He introduced measures that improved conditions for all workers, including children.
He refused to hire workers under 10, which was common before that. 5- and 6-year-olds were working in the cotton mills.
The British Parliament passed a series of laws throughout the 19th century aimed at improving conditions in industrial factories. Today, these are known as the Factory Acts. For example, one of the Factory Acts limited the number of hours that children were allowed to work, and placed regulations on workplaces in terms of cleanliness and safety. In the United States, the National Child Labor Committee campaigned to end child labor. For example, they published photos and lobbied state governments throughout the early 20th century. Louis Hahn, an American photographer, took photos of child labor throughout this time period that were used by the National Child Labor Committee. His photos remain important for understanding the impacts of child labor during the time frame of the Industrial Revolution.
(1824) Can any man with a heart in his body and a tongue in his head refrain from cursing a system that makes slaves out of children? One little sidelight, you saw the pictures of the kids in the mine. One of the jobs they did multiple jobs. One of the jobs was just assisting the miners, handing them tools, bringing them something to drink, guiding the horses as the horses dragged the coal carts out. One of the other jobs they had was what they called trap boys. The mines had doors separating each different shaft of the mine, each line of the mine, because they tried to exchange the air. They had fans that blew in and out, and you had to close one door to make the air force out of another door. And so the only time they opened many of these doors was when the men were going in or the horse was coming out with the coal. So a boy would sit there in total darkness until he heard someone approaching. Then he would open the door. This is before the days of mechanization, other than the railroad tracks and the little carts that the horses pulled. And plus, children were paid so little, 75 cents for a 10-hour day. Then they would open the door, and then when the people passed through, they would close the door, and then they would sit there and wait till the next person in total darkness for 10 hours. This is what their life was like in the mines, and that's not even talking about coal dust and black lung and everything else that happened. So it's the stuff that happened was pretty incredible. Let me give you a little overview of the plug-in for economics before I go through the rest of this stuff. Before the Industrial Revolution, children were on farms, children helped out, and children were part of the working populace. Basically, they helped their families. They weren't hired by other people. During the Industrial Revolution, basically farming started to improve, and not as many people were living on the farms. The people who owned the farms could make do with industrial like plows and better in equipment, could make do with fewer farmers. And the industrialists needed people to work in their cotton mills and iron mills and everything else. So there began to be a shift from people from the country moving into the city. When they moved into the city, they didn't make as much money, so everybody in the family still had to work. The wife had to work and the children had to work, and they were hired in the mills. The economy aided that. The idea of the economy needing jobs, needing people to work, brought kids into the working economy, and as capitalism does, the owners, unless they were like the gentleman who said he wouldn't hire anybody under 10, magnanimous for those days when you consider 5 and 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds were working. Think of that, working in a mill with no guards on the spinning things, and as you heard, 40% of the kids in the school had been injured. And he talked about losing fingers, but a lot of them lost entire limbs, and a lot of them were basically died as a result of their injury. There was no compensation, there were no laws, there was no support. If they got injured and couldn't work, they got fired, they got no money. And then I'm getting sidelined here. Go back to the economy. What happened during the 30s that changed? That's when the labor laws for no children were allowed in. What happened in the 30s that all of a sudden we began to think that we shouldn't have children working for adult jobs?
That's depression.
We had the Depression. What did you have? You had adults who didn't have jobs and who were working for pennies a day if they could get it. So who were the easiest people to get rid of? Children. And so why don't we make it, maybe this is my cynical side kind of coming out, why don't we say we're being protectors of children, we love children, they shouldn't be doing this, so we're going to take children out of the workforce and pass laws to protect children. So the laws in 1938, I have it written down somewhere what the law was called, and I'll give it to you later. The laws were passed, and these laws were all started in the early 30s during the Roosevelt era, to prevent children from working. And they always had exceptions. Farm kids could always work, and kids could still work over the age of 16 or 17 with their parents' permission, that type of thing. But they did cut down on little children working without any control or any supervision. So what happened, and are you aware, I hope you're aware, that in meatpacking plants, I'll just go ahead and show you the picture. You recognize what this is? That's like a 10-year-old wearing a hard hat, goggles, waterproof suit, rubber gloves, and rubber pants. You know what that kid's doing? In 8 states, meatpacking plants like Cargill, Giant Meat Packers, CPH, the people who make our Eckrich wieners and all the rest of that stuff, need people to clean the machinery at night. And how do they get around the child labor laws? They hire independent contractors, and then whatever the contractor does is up to the contractor. The independent contractor hires kids, 10, 12, 13 years old, and sends them in to the meatpacking plants at night to clean, which this kind of gave me a chuckle, skull splitters and the meat cleavers, all the machinery that's used to disassemble the carcasses of chickens, pigs, cattle, and in America even horses, is all clean. This stuff is razor sharp. It's covered with all kinds of goo and blood and entrails and everything else. Plus these kids, what do they use to clean it with, and why are they wearing the protective gear? They use incredibly toxic chemicals to get this stuff clean and then flush it out so the plant is ready for the next day of USDA inspection, so everything is clean. Cargill says they had no idea that kids were being used. The Labor Department says there's like 100 and some % increase in the last 5 years of children being employed in the meatpacking industry. And it's not just meatpacking. In the South, in Alabama, Louisiana, where they grow tobacco, they have kids picking tobacco, and what are these kids suffering from? Nicotine poisoning. It turns out when you handle tobacco on your bare skin, nicotine can be absorbed through your skin. So these kids are ending up sick and in the hospital from nicotine poisoning. These are 10, 12, yes.
Did you say they're helping in the tobacco fields now? Or is
Yes,
that
now.
Now.
They always have help, but now there's more. And economics, you know why there's more kids working now? Where do these kids come from? Are they kids from New Madison working in the tobacco fields? No, where are they from?
They're
They're from-
probably illegal.
They're illegals. They're from Guatemala, Mexico. There was like 16,000 kids last year and 160,000 in the last, 5 years or 6 years. I'll have to go back to my notes and look. When the parents bring the kids to the border and throw them over the border, they're unaccompanied minors, is what they're called. They're supposed to go to shelters or foster homes or somebody to control them. A lot of times they'll go into the communities of their own ethnic group, like the Guatemalans will live together and the Hondurans will live together. And these kids aren't allowed to go to school, they aren't allowed to work legally, but they need to provide income for themselves or for the families they're staying with. So they go to Cargill or they go to the processor that works for Cargill, the subcontractor. And these people who are enlisting these people, they go looking for these kids. They go recruiting these kids, 10, 14, 11, 10, I think 10 was the youngest I heard about being documented. And many of these are not, when they're documented, they're not even found. I mean, they don't know the answers for all of them because these are only the numbers I'm giving you are the legal numbers that the Department of Labor has found. And that's primarily these 8 states and the 8 plants that the meat packers were caught doing it. And of course, they all came out and said, oh, we would never employ an underage kid. That we were completely blindsided by that, and it'll never happen again, so time will tell. So these kids, undocumented aliens working, and of course, what is the reason that children were hired during the Industrial Revolution? They didn't know anything about unionization. They didn't know anything about standing up for their rights. They were the perfect employees. You could humiliate them, you could push them around, you could embarrass them. You could tell them what to do, and they were kids. They were used to following orders. An interesting sidelight, kids can be pretty crafty. You're familiar with the Horatio Alger story? This is books in the 20s and 30s about the plucky little kid, which is part of capitalism, who rises to great heights and makes great money because he's a hard worker and industrious and everything else. One of the ways the newsboys were industrious was they were given a certain number of papers to sell to get their commission. And they would go around and say to people, kind-hearted people, this is the last paper I have to sell. If you can sell this, I'll get my commission and I can go home. So a kind-hearted person who really didn't want a paper would take a paper. And then the kid would pull another paper out and go up to the next guy and say, this is my last paper. If I can sell this, I can go home and feed my mom and my brother and my sister. And won't you please help me out by giving me a nickel or a dime or whatever the paper was for. And they would consistently do that. So things haven't changed. The guy who sits on the corner of the interstate on-ramp and says he needs work and needs help, and you give him $1, and then he goes and climbs into a new Lexus and drives home. Things haven't changed a bit, but that is still no reason to expect kids to work like that. So anyway, that's the reason that the Industrial Revolution repeated itself in the economy in the last 10 years or 5 years. Because of COVID, there was a tremendous labor shortage again. Who was there to fill the ranks of the labor children? The most appalling thing about it is this doesn't happen. Some of it happens under the table and illegally, but what's happening in 14 states in the United States, including Ohio, conservative, and it's always conservative, Republican legislatures are changing the laws. They're saying that now children can work in, they can stay in like fast food franchises. They can work till 2 in the morning. Instead of having to be 16 or 17, now 14-year-olds can work at McDonald's. And this has been going on illegally for years. That people have been hiring 12 and 13-year-olds and 10-year-olds to work at McDonald's. McDonald's says, oh, we don't know anything about it. Those are all franchises. We have no control over who they hire. One set of McDonald's in Alabama was fined, I think, like $1 million because of all the child labor laws they violated. So what does the Republican legislature in Alabama do? They change the laws. And in contravention of the federal law, and I don't know if this has been adjudicated yet, if the state law can override the federal law, and I don't know if that's gone to court, and the article I read didn't have the answer for it, but states are passing laws that kids can work. And one of the most interesting ones was in Arkansas. What's the governor who is the daughter? Huckabee is the governor of Arkansas. Just passed a new parents' rights bill to give parents more control over what their kids can do. One little thing they slipped into the parents' rights bill: children as young as 14 could get a job without their parents' permission. It used to be in all these child labor laws, kids could work at a motel as a cleaner or a restaurant as a fry cook or whatever, but they had to have a written sheet from their parents by the state that said this is what the rules are, this is how late they can stay out, this is what they can do, this is what they can't do dangerous jobs. In Arkansas, Governor Huckabee has changed that parents' rights bill to say kids as young as 14 can get a job in any place without the parents' permission. So it's parents' rights except when it contravenes or it goes against what business wants. Then parents' rights are out the window. And this just goes on. I've got list after list after list of laws that are being passed. They're allowing kids to work as roofers, 14-year-olds to work as roofers. Can you imagine a 14-year-old on a roof, how dangerous that is? They're allowing 14-year-olds to work in excavators, which means people laying pipelines, and you've all seen all the stories on the news of pipeline trench collapses where people are killed. 14-year-olds are doing that kind of work. They're being allowed to operate heavy machinery. And I can tell you as a farm kid, 12-year-olds were operating tractors and balers and manure spreaders, but that was under the supervision of a parent. And parenthetically, that was always not without incident. When I was on EMS in Pleasant Hill, a Mennonite farm on the edge of town, we got called out for a crisis, an emergency. All time, just about this time, they were filling silo. The 7-year-old was riding on the silage wagon and fell off into the blower. Anybody know what a blower is? At the bottom of the silage wagon unloads the silage, and this thing with big metal paddles about this wide, 7 of them, go around in a circle powered by a tractor PTO and blows the silage 70 feet up into the air into the silo. This kid fell into that blower. It was just shredded. There was hardly anything that jammed the blower, but it was, that's something I can't get out of my head. So accidents happen, farm kids, accidents happen. That's part of the things they try to control. But these were accidents, and the other thing is they are passing rules in the states that no compensation. The companies that are responsible for the accidents cannot be sued for liability, cannot be sued for damages, cannot be sued for negligence when a child is hurt. Kind of like the countries or the states that are passing laws that doctors can't be sued for malpractice if they do something wrong. Once again, the conservative ethos is kind of taking over. We're going back to the pre-Reformation days when there was no control over it. Okay, so that's this kid. Let's see who else. And this one is in Iowa. And Iowa used to be a progressive state. Wisconsin used to be a progressive state, but they were taken over by the conservative, and we will have to discuss, and I think we have discussed a little bit how the conservative wave has swept the country and how people vote against their own personal economic interest. The first story I read about it was in Kansas, which used to be a blue state, Elf Landon. I mean, it used to be a very, very progressive state. One of the first states that voted right and started to go toward Reagan. It was all based on religion. Kansas was a very religious believing state, and they started talking about connecting religion to Republicans, and they became joined at the hip. So all these people who were in unions and Democratic liberal farmers all became instant conservatives. It was almost as fast a switch as in the South, when you had during the Nixon times, when all of a sudden all the conservative Democrats became Republicans. And when people tell you Republicans passed, as Lincoln passed all of the pro-civil rights legislation, that was true before the conservative Democrats switched over to being Republicans. When that happened, all of a sudden all the progressive legislation became democratically sponsored. And that was the reason for the switch. When the Blue Dog Democrats basically obstructed anything that John Kennedy wanted to do as far as civil rights, they all switched parties. Okay, I didn't get everything done, but we're pretty close, so we're running out of time. Any questions? ALEC, we've talked about ALEC before. A lot of these laws in these conservative states, and Ohio is doing the same thing. Ohio has laws in the legislature right now to reduce child protection laws. ALEC is that consortium of rich people who want to make the world better for conservatives. They basically hand out a blueprint of law that's already written. All the local legislator has to do is sign their name at the bottom and post it. A lot of times they don't even know what the law actually says, and are surprised sometimes to find out some of the little loopholes and the little things in the bottom. But that's part of the danger we are facing with democracy. So. All right, comments, questions? There's a ton of stuff here, so we can do more later.
It's very interesting, the contradiction between protecting child's interest, and the economic gains from it. You think we would have learned our lesson from the industrial age that those injuries, as you cite, Jim, and other atrocities, and yet at the same time, politically, the card that now is being played is parents' rights. And we have rights over any school and what you teach and whatever. We have rights against what you tell your doctor and what you don't. We have rights about what their child tells the psychologist and what they don't. And all of that's working its way into a strong parent right advocacy, whereas the flip side is do whatever because we don't mind, we want the businesses to thrive, so we will look the other way when our child has to work until 2 a.m. and misses critical examinations the next day, which they've not studied or prepared for, because that's a whole different story. Very interesting how the political paradox works there in that case. You made the point about the ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. They produce boilerplate information that comes out conservatively in every legislature across the country, and Ohio is one of its best customers.
And this is the funniest thing and the saddest thing is it's all shrouded in the language, the hypocrisy of the language. When the Ohio legislators come up and they want to reduce, they want to say that kids can work at McDonald's till 2 or 3 in the morning cleaning. One of the rationales for that, when people say, why do you want to do that? These kids are spending too much time on computers playing games. They need to learn to work hard. They need to learn responsibility. Another one that they use. These kids can't afford college anymore, so they need to learn a trade. That's something I didn't really go into.
Or they can't afford to maintain their cars, which they're driving in high school.
Yes. And another thing I didn't mention, but which I had in my notes, is apprenticeships. Back in the revolutionary times, before the Industrial Revolution, kids still worked, and the kids in the city became an apprentice at 10 or 11 or 12 years old to a shoemaker or a printer or a blacksmith or a furniture maker. And that was almost like indentured servitude, but as they tried to say about the positive points of slavery in the South, they did learn a trade that they could make a living with. So that was, that's kind of a colonial thing that I don't quibble with. Kids did learn a trade, and their parents sent them to a printer or a bootmaker or a blacksmith, and they helped that guy for little or no money, but they did learn a trade, and they had a trade that they could live on when they got done. But to say that that's the reason we want kids to work at McDonald's is because they need to learn to work with their hands, and not everybody can go to college, is another shitload. So, okay, I could go on for this forever. So, we're offering.
Fish.
Oh, yes, this is fish, and we have both of those there. If you can share, please share. If you need something, please take something. And we're going to hear If I Had a Hammer, a Perfect Labor Day song. If I Had a Hammer, reminds me of Pete Seeger and Mary Paul and John. Yeah. All right, our closing hymn is 343, A Fire, Mist, and a Planet. A century lone and frozen, a mother starved for her brood, and Socrates dread hemlock, and Jesus on the rood, and millions who, though nameless, the straight hard pathway trod. Some call it consecration, others call it God. Interesting song, Fire, Mist, and a Planet. Okay, extinguishing the chalice. With what benedictions shall I leave you, by Mark Mosher A. Wolf. With what benediction shall I leave you? This, in your life may you know the holy meaning, the mystery that breaks into it every moment. May you live at peace with your world and at peace with yourself. And may the love of truth guide you in your every day. Amen. We will build a land, is our postlude. I think I hear Peter, Paul, and Mary in there too, and Pete Seeger. As we leave today,
That's one of our hymns, yeah.
yes. As we leave today, this is what childhood should be. You should not have to work. You should enjoy your horse. And I'll throw in a little bit of, we're selling some property in Indiana where we had a dairy farm, milked 50 cows, and had 100 cows, fed out beef cattle, farmed 300 acres. I've been gone 35 years. This is what has happened to this is the milking parlor, the silo, grain storage bins. I've got pictures of the barn, but you probably want to see that. But it's enough to bring you to tears to see something that was a thriving place where you raise your kids, you raise your foster kids. You've got 50 cows, Brown Swiss, Jersey, Holstein, producing milk for County Line Cheese. If you remember County Line Cheese, the brand, that plant was this is on the County Line Road, and the plant was 2 miles down the road. Our grade A milk went to County Line Cheese, and we got a discount to buy cheese at County Line Cheese Factory. So,
Been unused for how many years?
what's that?
Been unused for how many years?
35 years since we've been down here in Ohio. And that's what happens when you have a happy farm family and your wife decides to get her own profession. She became a minister and was gone. I tried for 1 year. She was looking for a job anyway, but I tried for 1 year to milk the cows by myself, to bale hay by myself, to fill the silo by myself. Planting and harvesting I could do pretty well by myself, but baling hay, when you go out in the field and you run your baler and you bale 10 bales, then you go back on the wagon and stack them, and then you go bale another 10 bales and you go back in the wagon and stack them. And then you bring them and you run 10 bales up in the mow, and then you climb up in the mow and stack the bales. And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. So, and our kids were young, and we weren't the kind that were going to make them do that. They were too young actually to do that kind of work. So the auction is October the 9th, so that'll be a part of our lives that'll be gone for that time. But instead of memories, we'll have cash, so that's not so bad. All right, I had brought a karaoke thing, which I was going to use today, and I totally forgot about it. We need to test this sometime to see if, for the people, and I guess the people who are part of hearing problems that weren't here today, so it wasn't a really good day to test anyway. But we need to test this and see if it works. Because the first thing I did was I gave them an individual little speaker, and when I would speak into the phone, it would come out of the speaker, but it came out like 2 milliseconds later than what they could hear from me, and that confused them. So if I speak into the microphone, maybe it'll all come out the same, and maybe that will work. I don't know. We'll try it and see. What I'm hoping for is no interference that we were getting from the giant speakers in the sky. So. All right, have a good week. Please wear your virus protection, get your shots when they're due. And if there's somebody at Kroger's coughing, move to another lane. And wash your hands.